You've been playing eDrums for a while now and you've got your kit sounding just the way you want it. You've got some shows coming up with your band and you think it might sound awesome on stage. Should you use your eDrums live? Let's find out. There's a lot of drummers who would never even consider using their eDrums in a live scenario. Acoustic drums reign supreme on the stage and you just don't get the same big, balls to the wall, rocking feeling out of electronic drums, right?
eDrums are great as a practice tool, but the playability trade-off just isn't worth it on stage.
A lot more people now use at least some electronic elements in their live setups, with hybrid kits being part and parcel of most professional stage shows. But most of these are still retaining an acoustic core, only using the electronics to augment the acoustic kit. Trying to replicate that same feeling that you get from an acoustic kit on stage, where it throws sound out in every direction, there's loads of air movement and feedback on stage, sounds like it could be a lot of hassle. So is going the whole hog and using eDrums live on stage worth it to you? I think the two main things that will really dictate which way you go on this are going to be personal preference and circumstance. But let's say you've landed yourself in the position of really loving your e-kit and you definitely want to use it live. What are the advantages of doing so, and what kind of people and circumstances are best served by going this route? And just as a quick aside, the next video is going to be looking at why you might not want to use your eDrums live and who isn't best served by it. So if that also sounds interesting to you, check that out when it comes out. So these first few points are going to be the ones that I would call the obvious ones, starting with volume control. A lot of the time, those of us who play e-kits will either be hobbyist or maybe semi-professional drummers who play small to medium-sized venues. Personally, I'm out with my cover band most weekends playing professionally, but the venue sizes are still very mixed. And due to the variation in the clients, we've run into volume control issues many times. It's becoming increasingly common to find out when you arrive at a venue that they've got some kind of noise limiter installed, or at least they tell you that they've got some kind of noise limiter installed. Or sometimes it's even just a member of staff walking around with a decibel meter. And I find that this is often the case at venues where they don't always have live music on, such as hired function rooms and wedding venues and things like that. So as I say, the most obvious advantage of eDrums really shines through here. There's an argument I see get bandied around a lot that suggests that good players can just regulate their playing volume to fit any venue size. And I don't completely disagree with that, because being able to play very softly and very loudly is a very important skill for a good musician. But I'm not going to lie, I feel like nothing really kills a party vibe like feeling like the band are holding back. I've been playing live for a good 14, 15 years now, and I can play quietly when I need to play quietly, but the band that I'm in is labelled as a party band, and I feel like there's a certain amount of energy that has to go into our performances that's really difficult to achieve when you feel like you're reining yourself in. eDrums in this scenario allow me to just keep playing at the same velocity that I normally would do in a large venue without having to worry about the volume. I'm still getting the performance side of a big cracking snare drum, but just without the volume that's going to deafen people. On a related note, it can be difficult to regulate your stage volume as a band with an acoustic kit in a small venue. When you're on a small stage, or no stage, as I've sometimes found to be the case, trying to get every other instrument over that benchmark volume of an acoustic kit can be really difficult without deafening each other. I've played on plenty of large stages where you're almost so far away from each other that you can barely even hear each other, but if you're not in that position, having a perfect control over your on-stage volume and your monitoring is a huge advantage. Next in the sort of trifecta of obvious points about eDrums is that you can have a variety of sounds with only one drum kit. You don't need to bring loads of extra percussion or another snare drum or anything just to achieve sounds for one particular song. And this is especially the case for people in cover bands, because in one song you might need a really big reverby 80s style snare drum and a cowbell, and then on the next song you might need a small, tight, dry snare drum, and a bongo set. And with eDrums you can have all those on a song by song basis from the same selection of pads, and you can make sure that your effects are dialed in and ready to go every time. And of course you can achieve this very easily nowadays with a hybrid setup. You can add a multi-pad and some triggers to your snare and kick, for example, and that could give you a multitude of percussion sounds and some big thick snare layers or kick drum layers. But if you need to fundamentally change the sound of your snare drum, for instance, that's not as easy to pull off even with a hybrid setup. And without something like a rack unit for effects or even like a Yamaha EA-D10, it's not necessarily as easy to get particular effects that you might need on a per song basis. If you're anything like me and many other drummers that I've met, you might find tuning your kit to get a very consistent sound for every show somewhat of a chore, and one that I'm not even very good at. Or even if you're not like me but you do require a very, very consistent sound, this is so easily achievable on an E-kit that it may as well be cheating. Other than having to do some general EQ tweaks for the specific room that you're in, you can typically just set your sounds how you need them and then never touch them again. This one can be a slightly double-edged sword because some drummers don't want to be sound engineers, they just want to play drums. However, if you're happy to do a bit of tweaking and you know exactly what sound you want to hear out of the PA and somewhat how to achieve it, then you're going to have a very easy time doing this with an E-kit. It's very easy to get your own mix right if you don't have to rely on somebody else sending it to you. And if your module has the ability to record a performance, you can actually even record one of your songs in and then go out front, listen to the front of house mix and control your own sound that way too. And this level of flexibility isn't as easy to achieve on an acoustic kit. Getting somebody else to sit down behind your kit and play your drums isn't always that reliable, as they might not play exactly like you do. And if you're relying on in-house engineers to do your sound, you just kind of got to trust that it's going to be okay. And in most situations it should be okay because that engineer will be there for a reason. They're getting paid to do what they do. But some of the venues that I've played at don't even have sound engineers. You're often expected to either have your own engineer with you or just to mix yourself on stage and line out to their PA. And in these situations, having that extra layer of control over your own sounds is very useful. Space can be a surprisingly large issue when it comes to playing in small venues, and this is another area where eDrums have a distinct advantage over acoustic drums. Electronic drums can come in all shapes and sizes without affecting the sounds that are on board your module. So there's an inherent flexibility with how small you can make your kit's footprint if you need to. I've gigged on a few very, very compact kits, and even my current E-kit right now, even though the head sizes are very, very much acoustic-like, the shell depths are much more compact than my acoustic kit. You also have the added benefit of not needing to bring any additional gear like microphones or mic stands, which can take up a bit more room. Of course, there's more wires and stuff with an electronic kit to begin with, but when you're doing your own sound in particular, you might need things like microphones, mic stands, and then even a knowledge of how to get a good sound with those. So with electronic drums, you can avoid this additional headache and just plug straight in. One of the sort of unsung advantages that I've noticed while playing electronic drums is just how much less I spend on maintenance and consumables on a gig-to-gig basis compared to with my acoustic kit. Typically, mesh heads practically last forever as long as you're not using chipped drumsticks and you don't overtension them. So you won't find yourself having to replace heads on a regular basis like you would do with an acoustic kit. Rubber cymbals can take a fair beating as well. I've not cracked an acoustic cymbal in quite a while, but this is a sore point for drummers. Having to shell out a few £100s or dollars on a new acoustic cymbal is never fun. And your sticks last much longer as well because you don't have metal cymbals chipping away at them. I usually have maybe 3 pairs of sticks on hand with my electronic drums, and it's very rare that I ever even need to replace one of those pairs. Whereas when I go out on the road with my acoustic kit with my band Sonic Boom 6, I will usually have probably 5 pairs of sticks on hand at any time, and I'll usually have to replace at least one of those pairs even after just a short run of dates. And even if you're not a particularly hard hitter and you don't break your sticks very often, they do just wear down over time and become unusable. So that just ends up being another additional cost when you're out on the road that you don't really have to worry about so much with eDrums. Of course, the initial outlay and entry point for electronic drums is often much more expensive, but once you've got all that stuff in place, the day-to-day costs tend to come down in comparison. Having the appropriate equipment is going to make the difference at all levels of live playing. The biggest obstacle that most people face when playing eDrums on stage is getting the feel right, and exactly what equipment you might need in order to achieve this is going to vary depending on who you are. If you're wanting the whole band to be able to hear you well on stage, then either a wedge monitor or a PA speaker or a drum amp of some kind is going to be essential. If the band already has this gear, then that's great, you're well on your way. You're likely to want some kind of personal monitoring, and most people tend to go for in-ear monitors for that. Again, if you already have access to those, or you're just happy to invest the money in them, then you're not going to be held back by anything, and eDrums are going to be a viable setup for you on stage. This one's kind of a given, but I thought I'd mention it because so far I've mostly been talking about like cover bands and stuff. If you write electronic music and you use a lot of samples or even your drum module sounds in the music that you write, an electronic drum kit is going to be the most natural way to reproduce this in a live scenario. If you have a module that loads or layers samples, then of course you can use any samples that you've used on a track in your module, and it means you get to keep that whole electronic vibe going rather than trying to reproduce electronic samples with the inappropriate tools. Of course, this is another area that hybrids can work fine, but you could still then run into any of the earlier problems that I've mentioned using one of those setups. This one speaks for itself really. If you just love your eDrums, you love the sound, just give it a go. You are the perfect person to try eDrums on stage just because you want to do it. So there's definitely certain people and live situations that will really gel well with running an electronic kit. If you're in a cover band and you need lots of flexibility on every level, then there's a lot of advantages that you can utilise. If you're responsible for your own sound and you know your gear well, then every week you can be putting out a consistent, solid stage sound and front of house sound that will have people in disbelief that your kit is even electronic. If you happen to play a lot of holiday parks, social clubs, bars and other small venues that have tight volume limits, then you can keep everybody happy while still being able to bring the party. And finally, if you just happen to love the sound of your eDrums and you're very happy to jump into the unique aspects of running it live, then just go for it. I want to see more electronic drums on stage. If you're thinking about gigging with your eDrums, then I hope this has helped in some way. My next video is going to be about potential drawbacks or possible disadvantages of running an electronic kit live, and which people and situations might not necessarily benefit from it. And following that, there's going to be a video about how to optimize your eDrum setup if you choose to use it live. So if they sound good to you, then feel free to tune in for those when they're released. If you already happen to gig with an e-kit, let me know in the comments. I'd love to see everybody's setups. And if you never have used an e-kit live, feel free to share why. You never know, the point might be addressed in the next video. But however you prefer to play, there's legitimacy in all avenues. So thank you very much for watching. Cheers.